Hello and welcome, everyone. Excited to have you here today with us for our webinar on the culture imperative, building the next cycle of culture to support the organization. Very happy to have Tom Bradbury with us today as well, and we'll do a proper introduction of him in just a moment. A few webinar reminders and some points to mention. Our purpose for today is to share knowledge and benefits of why great culture is imperative in developing the traits necessary for organization success. Please write your questions in the Q&A section. We answer all those questions at the close of the presentation. If we can't get through all the questions, as usual, we will follow up via email afterwards. Regarding the materials, yes, the entire webinar is being recorded. You'll receive a link to this shortly, and you also have the ability to separately download the presentation file, which you'll see today. IBDC.D certification holders will receive 1 CPE credit by attending today. Just be sure to follow the proper CPE credit submission guidelines. Let's do an introduction of Tom before he gets started. Tom, you're welcome to join video and audio right now if you'd like. Let me give you some of your kudos here. Tom is the CEO of Broadgauge, an organization with the mission of generating objective human capital performance data for corporate leadership. He is a pioneer in quantifying and monitoring the financial impact of culture on corporate performance for CHROs, CEOs, CFOs, and board directors. And he's also the author of the book, The Culture Project, 30 Days to Reboot Your Organization. I am your host, Mark Pfister. I'm a governance and strategy expert. I also have a book called Across the Board regarding the architecture and structure of modern-day successful boards. And I'm also the creator and the implementer of the IBDC.D board education and certification program. Tom, welcome today, and I'll give one other tidbit of information before we get started. Tom, you and I, for many years, were competing CEOs of separate technology companies. And I know when we both exited those companies and later had met up, I believe through LinkedIn, you had mentioned to me that we were frenemies during that time, and I laughed very hard when you had said that. So it's great to be in contact with you for many years now, and this is, I think, your second or third webinar with us and sharing information on the evolution of human capital data.
Yeah, great, and I really appreciate you having me here today. I appreciate going through the educational program, and always being able to bounce some ideas off you. So
right.
Gone from frenemies to great relationship.
There you go. There you go. All right, I'm going to stop sharing here so you can present on your side.
Again, thanks for having me here today, Mark. Nice to be here with everyone who's joining us. Today, we're going to talk about the culture imperative, building the next cycle of culture to support your organization. I add a little line to that these days. It's also protecting your organization and protecting your culture moving forward. I like to first start. There are many interpretations and definitions of culture. I have found this one to be the most simple and enduring, which is a set of shared mental assumptions that guide interpretation and action in organizations by defining appropriate behaviors in various situations. And in some regards, how shared those mental assumptions and behaviors is what your culture is. And, culture is how values are represented every day in your business. And I think it's really paramount for leadership, particularly boards and C-suites, to understand that the board owns those values, and the CEO and the C-suite are the stewards of those very values. So why should leaders care? In McKinsey's most recent State of the Organizations, there are 2 points that I like to highlight. First, that it's more than just employee engagement. And I'd really like everyone to remember that. It's more than just employee engagement. It's the company's ability to get everyone aligned. And when you get everyone aligned around those values, you get those appropriate behaviors. And being aligned is not only vertically, but also horizontally. Second point that I really liked from McKinsey and the State of Organizations is healthy organizations outperform their peers. The most notable piece of research that I found enduring is the fact that McKinsey does organizational health, and they score it. And those in the top quartile of organizational health are 3 times more profitable than those in the middle quartile. I think, simply put, it pays to be above average in around culture and driving human capital. So more businesses shouldn't be, that should tell more businesses not to be complacent or satisfied with the status quo. That being said, culture is also there's a lot coming at leaders these days, and we can go on and on. But I work closely with the global real estate firm Cushman and Wakefield, and my friends over there provide me this great data, and this is up to date around culture in the workplace over the last 2 years. Only 58% of workers like their company culture, and even less, 53% of workers actually feel connected to their company culture. Making it more difficult to navigate this data is the idea that to attract and retain employees these days, workers want choice as it pertains to remote, hybrid, in-office flexibility of work, right? But at the same time, some leaders understand this on a gut level, perhaps, but the challenge is to offer that choice. But you also are dealing with the fact that in-office workers have a better connection to the company than remote workers. So there's a lot to navigate for leaders here, and calibrating culture around the future of your business becomes even more paramount. So again, it's an imperative, culture as an imperative. Why is organizational culture an imperative? One, leaders must hit that tipping point, right? Where they go and look at or even describe the workforce as the biggest expense, and move towards thinking and talking about the workforce as the biggest investment that should be monitored, right? Another point is there's a gap between your current state of culture and either what you want it to be or what you think it is most often, right? And that gap between current state and desired state culture is rife with organizational risk and depletes firm value. And that McKinsey note on the top quartile versus being average supports that, right? So we need to enable leaders to monitor the current state of culture's impact on business strategies that they're investing in, and also corporate performance, i.e. profit or EBITDA, right? And leadership has to drive an integrated approach. To McKinsey's point about alignment, it can't be silo-oriented or domain-centric. An integrated approach is required to achieve, or maybe better said, chase that desired state, right? Because desired state might not be a destination. It might be better described as a constant journey. So when you buy into those 4 points and you move forward, you can create this rationale and support and have this rationale permeate the rationale for enhancing human capital performance, where the concept of measuring and understand culture as essential for businesses to define and protect their future, right? Human capital is a driver of economic value creation. So think of culture as being critical to optimize the productivity of staff. And culture also is critical in managing turnover, managing attrition, most specifically regrettable turnover versus involuntary, focusing in on what you can impact and change, and meet this rationale for enhancing human capital performance. So there are 2 challenges as we see it today for this rationale to occur, to have success. The first is lack of this integration mindset, right? Efforts to align the workforce with the business are typically owned by the HR domain. So in most organizations, the default is HR, right? And when that happens, we're over delegating to HR to at leaving culture and alignment at arm's length from leadership. So if you bring that back to what I said a couple of slides ago, where the board and the C-suite own the establishment of those values and the culture, and being the stewards, right? Kind of over delegating it to HR kind of challenges leadership's ability to provide the right strategy and accountability, right? And part of that is because operationalized HR data lacks the objectivity that enables cross-domain accountability, but it also lacks some relatability, where going up with, say, typical employee engagement data, which can be very comprehensive and operational minded, it's not relatable to C-suite leaders and boards of directors. So again, operationally, the fault is HR, but in reality, who the stakeholders? You have HR, you have IT, you have workplace leaders, managers, leaders, which includes the C-suite and the board, and of course, all the workers, right? And the board and the C-suite need to set those expectations and create accountability moving forward. So to that challenge, we want to get to a place where these are four of the main players, and gives you an idea of their role, right? CHRO, and super important in this endeavor, must maintain a strong voice with objective human capital data, especially showing the bottom line impact, right? So HR needs to step up and play that role, and the rest of leadership needs to let the CHR join and participate in newer conversations. And if they're able to provide this human capital data, especially showing impact on the bottom line, their friends over in the CFO position, they thrive off of that quantifiable data that drives investment decision making, and they can think about human capital and what kind of return on investment they're getting in it. So the CHRO can help set that up for success, and the CEO, of course, is in charge of this integrated approach that aligns operational leadership with the objective strategy and governance that the board might provide. And the board, from these relatable metrics and relatable metrics in this rationale for approaching human capital in this fashion, they'll get better optics into organizational risk and better data to support the organization with an appropriate layer of governance. So the second challenge is this missing link to the impact of the financial performance of a business, right? Again, operational HR data fails to show the workforce, which is the biggest investment, showing the impact on the bottom line, right? So when the inability to quantify the business impact impacts the cross-domain inefficiencies, and ineffectiveness. It's not showing them what is happening to the business. What's the drag on the business because we're not partnering with certain financial indicators that can help show ROI, right? And this consistent failure to, if we don't have great data that connects to corporate performance, right, we're going to have this consistent failure to align those major culture stakeholders and CEO, CHRO, CFO, the CIO, boards of directors to rally around investments in the workforce and tracking return on that investment, right? So typically, in the past, what traditionally has not worked, things like program rollouts and KPIs, anecdotes and observations, behavioral KPIs, which might come from typical employee engagement platforms, or business KPIs, right? These are the type of things that are kind of don't become domain-centric. They're not exactly maintaining the macro view of the business, and historically, they have not been entirely helpful for boards to provide input on strategy and that layer of governance. So what we need to do is establish a new paradigm to culture within any given organization. This is the one we promote, which is bringing structure to culture through the four dimensions of culture: leadership, organization, which is largely values and policies, workforce, and technology. Each dimension has an impact on any desired outcome of culture. So And it's also wrapping back around to that mosaic of data. Think of how difficult it is to establish culture. No longer are we dependent upon where you work from. So people have unplugged from space, but yet you still need to establish culture. You can never unplug from these four dimensions in leadership, organization, workforce, and technology. And this enables looking at it through this new paradigm will help an organization establish what's right for them and in their future. And coupled with the ability to provide data off of those four dimensions and the new paradigm are, here's some sample financial indicators for leaders to leverage and put on the same pane of glass as these people metrics, right? Human capital ROI, which is the tracking the efficiency of every dollar invested in the workforce, total people cost, right? HCVA, which is human capital value add, where when we work with a client as an example and they're charting growth, they have a mission of growth, they love to look at HCVA, which is showing them profit per average employee. And of course, the cost of attrition, most specifically regrettable attrition, where you can start to factor in what percentage, what's the rate of attrition, and how often are you how often or how quickly you're getting people back in the seat, the replacement. Because that gap between the time someone leaves regrettably and someone comes back and fills the chair, there's a lack of productivity. So incorporating the lack of productivity into your costs, along with things like headhunter fees or ad placements, et cetera, really start to show the impact of turnover on any given organization. So if you buy into this new paradigm of culture, this is what it offers you. The ability to identify and measure the overall culture that really is the sum of all the parts. The ability to identify and measure the variety of needs across the workforce. So think about that. Different departments, different layers, different domains. Some people remote, full-time, hybrid, some people in the office, right? The variety of workforce needs has never been greater, right? So the ability to quantify this economic opportunity to invest in and optimize human capital is what will drive that integrated mindset, address the variety of workforce needs, and show impact. And that helps you create the strategy to achieve what's right for us, right? The data to uncover organizational risk that must be addressed, as well as the strengths that you want to protect. You want to maintain a macro view of the business's culture and less reliance on operational tools that become domain-centric and less likely to bring cohesion across different domains. And then the board and the C-suite get those relatable metrics to help identify cultures, the overall culture, as well as subculture, where you'll find pockets of varying workforce needs throughout the workforce, right? And you want to look and understand both the overall culture along with the subcultures, what the strength of the culture is, what's the consistency of the culture and subcultures, to look for deficiencies that represent risk and areas that are needed to be addressed. And of course, you need this governance to measure and understand progress, right? From a board perspective, having data to drive stakeholder transparency and accountability is key, right? Because that flows from the board through the C-suite down to operational leaders in HR, IT, finance, managers, workplace leaders, all of those stakeholders who are having and should have that integrated mindset and be a stakeholder in the culture, right? And that creates vertical alignment down through any department or group, right? Where you're aligning leaders and managers and understanding what levers to pull, what data to take action on, right? Where to make adjustments, but also horizontal alignment, right? Highlighting these invisible speed bumps that so often get in the way. And what this approach, where we can provide this governance, what it really does is help senior leaders do two things. One, it helps them understand where they need to step in and have a direct impact themselves. And two, maybe more importantly, is understand where they need to work with other culture stakeholders and have and remove barriers to help other culture stakeholders to be successful in creating that integrated mindset, but also taking action where it needs to be. And of course, everything that I just walked through, right, makes a lot of sense for any organization. That rationale for optimizing the workforce to be productive and keeping them at the firm longer, those in itself make a lot of sense. But there's this kind of backdrop or canopy of other things that are happening for companies who are based in the US, and that is actual regulatory disclosures around human capital. So in 2020, the SEC said, hey, here are 9 areas of human capital, right? And businesses are required to disclose any foreseen risk of material, which is very much set up to be Monday morning quarterback-ish, right? And to be frank, talking to various leaders who CHROs, CEOs, leaders, boards of directors for publicly traded companies, there was a varying degree of awareness around this regulation, right? But when there was awareness, really what it came down to is not understanding what or how to report these things. So the SEC is making strides in providing some more structure and over time more rigor to these disclosure requirements. In fact, just last month, the SEC's Investor Advisory Committee presented specific recommendations to the SEC that were passed without any edits, really dropping additional breadcrumbs, if you will, around what kind of data they will want to see moving forward in these disclosures, really around turnover, pay equity, diversity, et cetera, et cetera. But I mentioned this because not only is it going to have a direct impact on US-based firms, right? But it's also going to trickle down into the middle market, where the publicly traded firms have these younger cousins known as the middle market, and their best practices are going to be shaped by this regulation, which is very typical. And that, whether you're in the middle market or working for a publicly traded company based in the US, right? The need for a heavier dose or more focus than in the past with a board-led strategy and layer of governance around human capital is more paramount than ever before. So now that I've brought you through those, what I thought I'd do is show you a few slides to help you visualize an actual approach to this rationale for optimizing, using relatable metrics and tied to financial indicators to optimize human capital. So at Broad Gauge, we do 3 things. We measure culture, we quantify its impact, and we provide optics for leaders. Here is that new paradigm for culture, those 4 dimensions: leadership, organization, workforce, and technology, right? Each dimension will, once we collect data, each dimension will be deemed unbalanced or balanced. When it's unbalanced, the dimension will be represented by a square. When it's balanced, it will be represented by a circle, right? And then we have our culture balance index, which is an index 0 to 100. And we also leverage the ENPS to triangulate the metrics that come from the 4 dimensions, as well as the CBI. To triangulate gives us more data to play with and more insights to use, right? And essentially, we want to understand the strength and consistency, as I measured earlier, of the overall culture and the subcultures. So you'll note there's a bunch of levers on the top that we can now zoom in and out of different areas of the business using a company's census data. And this is what a culture profile would look like, where you see leadership and technology need attention. They're unbalanced. Organization and workforce remain balanced. And there's the CBI of 69. Now we can create a culture profile anywhere from the organization. If we want to look at what do women think of working here versus men? What the Toronto location, whatever levers we define to customize for a client up top is what we want to be able to help them search for. And once you establish this culture profile, again, unbalanced in leadership and technology and balanced in organizational workforce, you can actually see how these metrics can be helpful and how simple they are. As an example, imagine providing a summary report to a C-suite or a board where we can start to look at things as simply as comparing the CBI, our culture balance index, with a culture profile, department by department. Let's look at departments. Where are strengths and weaknesses? You'll note the color to help more areas of heavier organizational risk to stand out. So we're comparing by department, by location, by generation. It really helps summarize in a relatable format where a C-suite, a member of the C-suite or board of directors can quickly start to understand where and what type of risk, organizational risks exist that the organization should deal with. And what it'll also do is provide actionable data, not only for the C-suite to work with operational leaders, but it will also help managers or those operational leaders identify trends. So what this screenshot is showing you, if you're square or round, balanced or unbalanced in each of the 4 dimensions, these are the 16 potential profiles that can come out. And what you can do with this screenshot of the data, you'll see the filters are set for the entire company at the top. So 50% of this company is fully balanced, 6% is fully unbalanced. But when we can start to go here is to look and understand trends where we look at it by tenure, right? So let's say what kind of culture profiles are being emphasized, within the first year? What about the second year, third year? And we can start to see what kind of deficiencies appear over time as we compare this visual of profiles being emphasized tenure by tenure. And then even furthermore, what we can do is show the specific areas with actionable data, right? That to be prioritized. Where we have a client currently right now, a national real estate company, where they loved this particular viewpoint. In real estate, it's all about the markets. You have 15 or 20 markets across the country. And the CEO loves this data because it's very understandable to him in this case. And he feels like it's very actionable, where he can sit with the leader or manager of each market and understand, hey, look, we're doing great in a lot of areas, but these are the things that we have to improve on while also protecting those areas. So now you have leaders throughout the country with this kind of roadmap to protecting and evolving their culture. So I thought I'd offer that. And, ultimately to, back to that point of how do we create people-centric data that can guide us to a more optimized workforce. But, so you can see here on the bottom row, we're showing the status of each of the 4 dimensions, right? And they happen to be fully balanced, but we're putting them on the same pane of glass for C-suite leaders and boards of directors, where they can also see, how's my human capital return on investment, my CBI, our culture balance index, our rate of attrition, and then our human capital value add. We're starting to do something that not many folks out there haven't run into any, where we're putting people data next to financial data to really help companies gain traction on that rationale to invest in and optimize human capital. And, so in summary, before I turn it back over to Mark, just hit on these four critical takeaways. One is today's challenges demand that the board and the C-suite take responsibility for their culture. Two is we need to rise above operationalized data or the operationalized view and get that macro view of the business to drive value, that integrated mindset, that integrated approach. And three, we need the data that promotes that integrated approach, which allows for transparency or demands transparency and buy-in from all culture stakeholders, leadership, managers, HR, IT, et cetera, et cetera. And finally, delivering those relatable metrics and financial indicators as a suitable layer of governance for a board of directors to meet and discuss strategy and governance with the C-suite. Mark?
Tom, great job. You're right on time. You nailed it. Let me go back. If you can stop sharing, I'll go ahead and share my screen. We can answer. There's a bunch of questions that are rolling in here as well. I'm just going to make the comment real quick about, I laughed out loud to myself when you said, if you are willing to buy into the culture paradigm shift. Interesting way to put it, because there are those on either side of the fence. One side that says that culture is absolutely paramount in the organization, and others say that the financial performance is absolutely paramount. I think what they're missing on the latter I just mentioned is that the financial performance is directly linked to the culture of the organization. Quick note before we get started, many of you today are here obviously not just to see Tom and get his wisdom, but also for your CPE credits. For those that are joining us and are not familiar with the IBDC designation, know that Tom's topic, along with its links to values, its links to culture, how that links to governance and strategy, all of that is included in the IBDC program. Hope to see you there at some point as a registrant and a graduate at some point as well. All right, Tom, let's get through to a few questions. I'm just going to kick off with one quick question as I compile all the questions rolling in. You talked about Regulation SK that relates back to the SEC in the US. Are there any other areas that you're seeing in terms of traction globally currently in regulation areas compared to SEC in the US?
I think Europe is a little ahead of us in and around regulation, and there's a lot of stuff they're doing more specifically in ESG that I think there are a lot of firms where this stuff is much more top of mind in Europe. But other than that, candidly, our focus is here in the US. So we're tracking these SEC regulations and want to continue to improve how we're providing objective data that can help those publicly traded companies in the US meet those disclosure requirements.
Great. If my organization already has a strong culture, is there still value in this approach?
Yeah, I used the word a few times, and a CEO told this to me a few months ago, right? Like when they had positive results in certain areas of the company, many areas, he said, boy, we need to protect this. Coming from, he's a very astute leader, knowing that because it's positive today, there's not something that can't change for a host of reasons. So it's not only improving it, it's also protecting where it's a positive influence on the workforce.
Great. Here's another question. How are the leadership, workshop, organization, and technology vectors mapped into the 9 workforce data measurements?
The 9 is specific to the SEC's regulation?
I'm assuming so. If the person would ask that question,
they're not directly
in that way. Yeah,
they're not directly linked to those areas currently. We established the 4 dimensions for 2 reasons: how to appropriately bring structure to culture, and 2, we also kept our North Star was maintaining these practical compliance like metrics so that they don't get overly comprehensive, whereas C-suite leaders and or boards of directors end up at arm's length from them. So the 4 dimensions are not one-to-one linked with those 9 areas of the SEC.
How often should organizations do this? I'm assuming that question is around the frequency and the consistency of the surveys, questionnaires, participation.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I'm of the opinion that it should be done twice a year. For example, there are companies like McKinsey that do an organizational health survey and deliver results, but they wait to compare those results with the annual financial performance, the results that are documented. I believe that many organizations should be doing it at least twice a year, every other quarter, and they can actually create surveys that measure for different important attributes of any given culture, given what's right for that business. So we can measure two different things, but to be doing something every 6 months is more in line with continuous improvement rather than just doing it once a year and see where you ended up. That being said, we also work with some firms who are going through significant transformational efforts and initiatives, large, broad training and development initiatives, digital transformation, workforce transformation, where embedding this in as a mode of monitoring that investment, where we're doing two things. We're providing our metrics back as a roadmap for the change management process, what to pay attention to where during the course of this big, expensive, important initiative, but also we're showing ROI on that overall investment in the people, whether it be training, digital transformation, building out a new workplace, whatever it might be.
Yeah. One of the shortcomings I see in this, Tom, in the board space is that they're relying on data that comes from a very basic survey. As you mentioned, it's done once a year. They're trying to really get information to help not only govern, but also weigh in on the strategy of the organization. And it's just insufficient to be able to do that. Also having gone through the IBDC.D course, that the emphasis we place on the values of the organization, creating the culture and living of the culture and the environment is extremely important. It's really amazing to see, even since our last webinar together, which I think was 2 years ago, the evolution and the maturity of the understanding of culture weighing in on the performance of the organization at all levels. And also, I'll say the maturity of the tool that you have that's is moving this from a feeling and an emotion of what the culture is like to actual measurement, not just qualitative, but quantitative measurement.
Yeah, it makes me want to say two things. Like most CEOs that are part of the projects that we work on, when we go in and measure and analyze, they know some things intuitively for sure. But when they see the data, even if it directly backs up what they intuitively stated, I think this is what's happening, something different snaps into place where they've kind of quantified with what they knew was going to happen, and they have data to approach it. And I think that's really, really important. And then the other thing is, you're right, in getting people to think this way requires these connections, having relatable metrics to senior leaders, having that connection to the financial indicators. But the data also is valuable. I just had a CHRO, a woman we just recently worked with, and she went from what is this versus typical employee survey. But I just recently had a call with her where she said to me, Tom, I get it. How often should we be doing this?
Yeah.
Right
Yeah.
now.
Yeah. And here's a question from a CHRO that says they totally get all of the things you're mentioning. They understand the importance of it. They have trouble getting traction in their organization with fellow leaders on the topics you're discussing. Any recommendations on that?
Well, I would, it's the data is what convinces them. And sometimes it's someone, in this case, the CHRO, partnering with the CEO to help address that barrier. Try it. Try something like this, whether you use us or someone else who does something similar. I haven't run across anyone, but if you try it, and the data is very, very compelling because it creates a level of transparency and accountability, like I said, that creates partnerships horizontally through the organization.
Mm-hmm. I don't see any other questions, but I do see a comment here, and this is your pat on the back for today. Just a comment to say thank you and spot on. Here's another question, actually, just came in. Any advice on how to get more traction from senior people? That may be similar to what we just mentioned, but maybe more generically comment on this, Tom, whether it be the board or if you are in a management position and you think this is the right thing to do. How are you selling this to the hierarchy in your organization.
Yeah, positioning the connection to the financial indicators is very, very important, and making sure they understand that you're not going to give them data that gets them in the weeds. You're going to get them the data that's going to help them be efficient with their time in helping, let's say, a CHRO capitalize on this new rationale, this new paradigm.
Yeah, very good. Well, Tom, I think that's it. Again, everybody will have the chance to see the recording as well as download the presentation. You'll receive an email in the next day or so with a link to that. Tom, I thank you very much. I am happy also to say that we are no longer competing CEO frenemies. We are now true friends. And appreciate all of your wisdom, all of your everything you put into this tool as well to develop it. I think it's quite brilliant. So nice job.
Thank you. Much appreciated. It's a lot of hard work, and talking to some people like you, smart people like you, as well as some other people that I've met through the educational platform that I've connected with and have also helped me greatly. Like having kind of exposure to not only the educational platform, but also the people or my fellow graduates has not been small for me of a contribution. So thank you. Thank you,
Great.
others.
Awesome. Tom, thanks again. Thanks everybody for joining. See you soon. Bye now.
See you.